It's the same result as the home test you took, positive. After a long pause and a stare, the woman asked, "Do you plan to continue with the pregnancy?" I wasn't sure how to answer. I wasn't sure if I wanted to answer. I had so many questions of my own that needed answers first. My boyfriend sat in an old blue chair, his eyes shifting in all directions but mine. Finally, our eyes met like those of strangers. He shrugged his shoulders. I turned away from him and back to the woman in the nursing scrubs. In a low whisper, I said yes. My boyfriend and I drove home in silence. Neither one of us knew what was safe to say. My mind was filled with thoughts of health insurance, pediatricians, diapers, clothes, and sleepless nights. With all of these things throbbing through my mind, there was one that loomed the largest. How the hell was I going to explain this to my family? To my mother? That's what scared me the most. My brother was 11 months older than I was, and already a father to an 8-year-old boy. Growing up, I knew my mother treated us differently because of our gender. But the day my brother announced he was going to be a father, that's when I knew exactly how different the rules were for us having children. I knew that when I shared the news, I would not receive the same nonchalant reaction he had. It was spring, a Wednesday, when I had my breakdown. I was scheduled to work at my internship preparing high school students for their futures, and here I was so unsure of my own. I had 3 college classes that afternoon, but instead of being at school, I was on the couch, curled up as if I was going to fit myself into a suitcase, wishing I could fit into a suitcase and go to one of those uninhabited islands in American Samoa. I didn't know what to do. I was alone. I didn't call into my internship, but they kept calling me. My phone was on vibrate, and I watched it dance across the coffee table, inching closer and closer to a meeting with the floor, with each phone call, voicemail, email, and text. By Friday, I still wasn't answering the phone. I was moving around my house in slow motion, in the same clothes I had been wearing since Wednesday. I could barely see straight. My eyes were so red and swollen from crying. There wasn't much to do around the house. There were no dishes to wash because I didn't eat. No laundry to do because I didn't change clothes. No bathroom to clean because I didn't shower. And my phone had stopped ringing. I figured my battery had finally died. The next week was just as tough. That Monday, I knew I had to go back to school and to my internship. Everyone questioned me about where I had been, what was happening. To some, I told the truth. To others, I lied, even though I knew I couldn't hide my pregnancy for long. And the toughest challenge hung over my head daily. I still hadn't told my mother. I noticed changes in my body every day. I stood in the mirror and I looked at my naked body, rubbing my hands across my belly, my fingers tracing the stretch marks forming on my stomach, all reminders of the whispered yes I said months earlier. As the weeks went on, I became proud of the fact that a baby was growing inside of me. On campus, it made me feel special, a cautionary whale, but special nonetheless. When I would get on the city bus to go to class, after a morning of vomiting, sipping on Sprite, and slowly chewing saltines, people would stare at me trying to guess my age, Milwaukee teen pregnancy statistics running through their heads. I wanted to wear a sign over my growing belly. I'm 24 years old and graduating from college next semester. Please don't stare. I was nervous about the reaction I received from strangers, but I knew the reaction I was going to receive from my mom would be a lot more confrontational. When I finally told my mother that I was pregnant, we were standing in the living room. "Mom, I have something I need to tell you. It's important." "What is it?" After a deep breath that I thought would be my last, I exhaled and said, "I'm pregnant." Her eyes went blank. Her once soft face grew furrowed and wrinkled with anger and tension. She stared at me like she didn't know me. Finally, she said, "Well, what are you going to do?" I looked at her and smiled. "Why are you smiling?" "I don't know, I guess because I'm happy with the decision I made." Tears began to roll down her face, fat drops, one by one. She turned away and headed upstairs. My brother was home and coming down the steps. He looked at me, standing at the bottom, and watched my mother as she tried to move, her feet heavy, like she was walking in wet sand. My brother looked at her, but she looked past him. He came down and asked me what happened. I told him what I had just told my mom. As my belly grew larger, my family came to accept my pregnancy. I was 36 weeks and 5 days along, and I was in art class, and I started to feel strange. I knew my baby was coming. It was 2 weeks before my final exams. My boyfriend drove us to the hospital. The overnight bag I had packed just weeks earlier was in the back seat. I cried all the way to the hospital because of the pain. My boyfriend was driving like he was in NASCAR, one hand on the steering wheel and the other one softly on top of mine. It was a nice change from the drive home from the clinic a few months ago. At the hospital, I called my mother, but she didn't answer. I couldn't understand why she was staying away. 2 days later, on Thanksgiving Day, I was still at the hospital due to an emergency C-section. My boyfriend had left to spend the day with his family, and I was alone. I held my son thinking, I'm glad I said yes. That night, my mother finally answered. When she arrived at the hospital, I looked at the new grandmother as she held my son. I wanted to ask her thoughts, her feelings, but we didn't speak. Her delicately placed tears said it all. She said, now I know why you were smiling that day."